there's a diminishing return on money emotionally.
Mm.
So if I give you a certain amount of money and you put it in your bank account, the time that you get that first check, you're going to feel a certain amount of joy of that check. As it sits in your account, though, over time, the money's ability to give you joy and fulfillment is going to diminish. And so you tell yourself, well, I can fix that. I'm just going to go get more money. But over time, there's an overall diminishing return emotionally on that money. And this is why you hear people saying, at the end of the rainbow, I got everything that I wanted, and then that thing was not there.
3, 2, 1.
All right, today we have David Park. What an incredible story. What a unique story that David has to offer. He gives us so much wisdom on this podcast about what true financial freedom is, what true joy is, and how to achieve that through real estate investing, but not only through real estate investing, but just taking a go-giver, a purpose-driven life. And so welcome to the show, David.
Thanks, man. I'm excited to do this with you guys. It's good meeting you. I love the energy in this place. Seriously.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. We get that a lot, and I think because of that, we're able to get some talent maybe that we wouldn't have. But
Yeah, I feel it.
it's a balance. You want what we have, but we also want it to be more professional. So we're trying
Right.
to like
The
toe
common
that
middle.
line.
I know. Yeah, not everybody's going to be the perfect mix, right?
Yeah,
And so you just
exactly.
got to throw some people in the mix and see how it goes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, Dave, why don't we just hear from the horse's mouth? Can you just give us a little background on yourself?
Yeah. So I am a full-time pastor at Mosaic in Northfield, super north in Jersey. And at the same time, I'm a real estate syndicator. I've been doing that for a little while now in the real estate space in general. And your listeners are really familiar with real estate investments. Started off with single-family homes. Actually started in Manhattan, managing, investing in Manhattan. And then kind of chasing yield, move out to Jersey, Philadelphia, where kind of in that region where I'm normally originally from. And then eventually I took the big leap out to Kansas City. I just felt like it was the perfect mix of job growth, population growth. There's energy, there's movement there. And also the yield is pretty nice out there. So I started investing out in KC, met some great guys, started syndicating with them, and found some great success with them. But then, as you could probably kind of tell, there's this weird mix, right? Like, I'm a pastor. A lot of what I do is help people, and I'm always trying to find purpose in where I allocate my energy. And then I have the syndication thing that I'm doing, which is great for me and my family, right? You guys all know about that space. But really kind of having difficulty figuring out, like, how do those two things collide, right? At a certain point, you feel like schizophrenic in like what you do, and that kind of climax to me finding Cora funds and trying to leverage real estate to really help people and to get the profits out for more purposeful design. And so that's a little bit about me and kind of where I am today.
Fantastic. I really appreciate that. How did you find a way to create that intersection between wealth generating and giving? Like, what is Core Funds and the history behind it?
Yeah. So like I said, a lot of the history is kind of behind where I'm coming from, how I'm trying to bring those two things together, and how you do it. There's probably a lot of ways that you could do it. But actually, I think real estate is really great for it because you're not investing in anonymous stocks where you don't know the people. When you syndicate, you actually become an owner of people's homes. And it gives you a lot of reach into people's lives because you're able to impact the actual community that they live in, right? I mean, that's one. But the profits generated, you can direct those profits to really make an impact. And so Cora Funds we call it end-to-end impact. We try to be generous with our profits, but even on the front end, we try to make an impact on the actual communities that we invest in. So we have all sorts of programs that we want to get off for single mothers, backpack programs. You know, a lot of the communities that we invest in are not A-class properties, right? And so for us, we buy C-class properties and we bring it up to a B, which actually gives you a lot of opportunity to help people in those communities. And so you can link up with churches and ministries in that area to try to help better the lives of the people who are there. And the property managers as well, we want to make sure the property managers are people who are intricately involved in people's lives. And so that's the front end of the impact, right? You can actually impact the people who live in those spaces that you invest in. And then we align every single partner who's involved in core funds to give generously of their fees. And so we want to make an impact as partners. And then obviously the investors, they're coming in with this understanding that this is not like every other syndication. We have a purpose behind it, and we create what's called a donor advised fund for them to bring their profits into to make an impact in the Northeast. Everything is more expensive here. And because everything is more expensive here, we need to be able to multiply wealth to make the impact that maybe you could do cheaper in the Midwest. So we're making the money in the Midwest, we're bringing it to the Northeast to help people here. And then finally, the actual people that we help are impacted, obviously, right? We focus on kids and the next generation. And so we call it end-to-end impact, right? From the beginning all the way to the end, we're looking for something to be there in terms of purpose.
Talk me through your thought process, right? Because I think you may have figured out something that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with. I consume a lot of content, and one of the things that you always hear is, follow your passion, figure out your purpose, right? Yeah. And I mean, we're capitalists at the end of the day, right? We're here to make money. If we don't make money, we're out of business. Yeah. And I think everybody gets into business with that intention to make money, right? And maybe you find your passion along the way, which it sounds like you may have. How did you balance that? Maybe that capitalist kill what eat what you kill kind of mentality, and then turn that into a force for good.
That's a really good question. At the end of the day, you can only eat so much. Right. And, you all know, and you guys are all in pretty good shape. And so you know that at a certain point, eating, there's a limit to how much it really helps you. Right. And we apply that logic to our health, but we rarely apply that logic to our wealth. Right. There's a great book that you guys should read. It's called The Paradox of Generosity by Christian Smith. He's a sociology professor over at Notre Dame, and he's done some studies on what generosity does to people. And the fallacy is that if you have more, then you'll feel better, right? And that's the fallacy. It's just like kind of saying, if the more I eat, the better I'm going to feel.
Right.
At a certain point, what Christian Smith found at Notre Dame is that there's a diminishing return on money emotionally. So if I give you a certain amount of money and you put it in your bank account, the time that you get that first check, you're going to feel a certain amount of pickup. You're going to feel kind of the joy of that check. As it sits in your account, though, over time, that the money's ability to give you joy and fulfillment is going to diminish, right? And you guys have probably experienced this yourself. And so you tell yourself, well, I can fix that. I'm just going to go get more money. But over time, there's an overall diminishing return emotionally on that money. And so you gotta kind of have to step back and think, like, so if, like, I'm kind of running into a wall here, and this is why you hear people saying, at the end of the rainbow, I got everything that I wanted, and then that thing was not there, right? And so you kind of have to think, maybe I need to pivot, or maybe I need to think a little bit more deeply about this. What Christian Smith finds at Notre Dame is that generosity actually produces a neurological effect on the brain that getting doesn't. And so he hooked up all these neurotransmitters to people and measured the dopamine effect on people who were giving a certain amount of money and getting a certain amount of money.
Wow.
And unsurprisingly, the people who were giving were experiencing a higher dopamine hit than the people who were getting. And he kind of tracks these kinds of studies to try to understand, like, what actually helps us when it comes to money. How much is too much kind of thing is a study that he does. And so some of those things help me to understand maybe we need to think a little bit differently about this if there's a diminishing return on just getting more.
I could definitely relate to that, and I think that I could definitely speak for you too. So we, through this event, earlier this year, and it was all centered around this one thing called that Eric actually came up with, the go-giver mentality, the idea of trying to provide as much value, expecting nothing in return. So I could definitely, relate to and agree with that.
Yeah, I didn't create that. I can't take credit
Or not
for
create,
it.
I'm sorry, but you always say it. But, I could definitely, it's very relatable.
There is no greater joy in my life than when someone calls me for help and I'm able to either be a listening ear or a helping hand.
Mm-hmm.
It just gives me so much joy to say, oh my gosh, I can make an impact to help other people. And I think that mentality didn't really stick until I started embodying a go-giver, a generous mindset. And believe it or not, living by that go-giver mentality has been probably one of the most fundamental aspects of my success. Is if you're constantly adding value and you're constantly giving others what you have and you're not withholding, right? I'm super generous with the money that I pay myself, right? And because of everything I'm willing to give at any given moment of time, I now have a ginormous network that I could reach out to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm able to effectively get any answer under the sun, any connection that I need, any help that I need to grow my business or grow personally. Man, I have it. And it's because of the generosity mindset, and it's written all over the Bible, right? But if you just give and you give and you give, the returns are just astronomical to dopamine, but also to your personal bank account. So I think that's tons of wisdom that you just dropped there. Thank you.
I guess it brings the question, though. There's a story Warren Buffett was asked why he doesn't give away all of his money. And he's like, well, it would actually be irresponsible because he plans to give it all away when he passes, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, there's nobody better at making money with money than me. So by giving it away, I'm actually hindering my ability to give later on.
That's right.
So
exactly,
it's a weird dichotomy there.
And that's kind of some of the thesis behind Cora is that we need to we're responsible for multiplying our wealth, right? And we can do that selfishly, we can do that generously, but it is a responsibility that I believe that the Bible tells us that you're supposed to multiply. There's a parable in the Bible called the parable of the talents. And the master gives a bunch of money to his servants in succession, and to the guys who multiplied their wealth, he says, well done, good and faithful servant. And then there's this guy who got scared and buries his wealth. And when the master comes back, he says, you wicked servant, you should at least put it in the bank and got some interest on it. You didn't multiply what you were given. And that's what your life is for, to use your talents to multiply what God has given to you. And so the multiplication factor is important, like Buffett says. But on the other side of that, multiplication in and of itself, as an end game, it's not what it's for. Right? There needs to be a distribution. There needs to be an impact that comes after that. I think Buffett's doing a great job partnering with Gates, because I've heard him say, no one gives it away better than him. No one makes it better than me. Right. And so at Cora, we're trying to bring those two things together. You guys probably heard a lot about passive income, right? But what if we could create passive giving by multiplying the principle through what you guys do, what many people do through syndication? And we all know the tremendous benefits that the government gives us to multiply in an accelerated way, right? Through all the tax benefits and things like that.
For real estate investors, right?
Yeah. So and then there are also benefits when it comes to charity, right? So there's a compounding, like we can mess with the rules in the system, right, to multiply and to give away and to accelerate our impact that way. So I think those two things have to come together, the multiplication and also the distribution.
That's a really good point. I heard something really wise from, I'm forgetting his name right now, but he runs a pretty sizable syndication business, owns a couple $100 million worth of real estate, runs an incredibly successful podcast, and he did it in just 4.5 years. I think he owns about 500 million.
This is Whitney?
Whitney Sewell. And he gives away 50% of his personal profits to orphans and people that need to kids that need help, right? And he said, I asked him this question, and he said, David, you cannot calculate the butterfly effect of today's dollars to one child's life. What kind of impact that child can now have to the rest of the world. You just can't calculate that. And so, God says to give 10%. I think he says give 10% and just trust. There's a reason why he's got it that way. But yeah, thank you so much for that answer, David. Can you just dig into Cora Funds? I know that it's end-to-end giving, but when it comes down to reinvesting that money back into North Jersey and our local community in which we live in, how is that money specifically utilized?
Yeah. So there's an organization called Young Life, and their whole focus is kids and high school, college, and even younger than that, camps and things like that. And kids are so lost these days. I mean, if you have kids or if you know young kids, you're probably scared for them because of the environment that they're growing up in.
Yep.
And so Young Life goes in there and tries to bring wholesome help, biblical help, to try to get these kids to a place where there's more holistic health and faith help in their lives. And, Jonathan Haidt, I don't know if you guys have read his book, The Coddling of the American Mind, but he's got a new book coming out next year called The Anxious Generation. And these kids are in a lot of trouble because of the neurological effect of what's happening because of social media and also the rewiring of their brains through screens and things like that. I think it's really important for us to think about them. And if we who know how to multiply wealth and resources don't help them, I think that's a huge loss. And so for us, we invest in Young Life, and we've created a donor-advised fund so that we could give to them. And we're really hoping that that butterfly effect that you talked about, it could compound here. But the cool thing about Cora is that that's kind of just where we're starting. There's kind of no end to how we can create impact. Once we have set this up, and you guys can actually do the exact same thing, there is no end to who you can impact. I was just at a fundraiser gala yesterday, and the point of this organization is called Zemele, and what they do is they empower South African women to self-sustain themselves and to provide help and coaching and guidance so that they can create businesses and help each other, even
That's
lend
awesome.
to each other. Yeah. They don't give them any money, though. All they do is to come alongside them, give them mentorship, guidance, teaching, the things that, you really need, and allow them to make the mistakes on their own, but to also to create within their own networks the ability to be self-sustaining.
Wow.
There's so many ways we could do it, because we know how to multiply wealth. And I think that really unlocks something for us.
That's amazing. Because for me, my issue with it's not really an issue, but the struggle I have with charity is like there's an easy way, which is just throw money at something.
Mm-hmm.
But what does that really do, right? You buy food for a guy for a day, right? It's like the parables, right? Give a man a fish and or teach him to fish and feed him for a life. So I struggle because it's like, how much time do we really have? I want to create something sustainable, right? That, if we're going to put money towards something that it can multiply and replicate and provide long-term solution, or you just throw money at something and hope it, pays off. But it sounds like what you've done is way more powerful than just throwing money at something.
Yeah, and that's one of the issues with charity, right, is that if you give $1 this year to help a specific cause, next year they have to come back to you and hit you up for that same dollar for next year.
Right.
But that's not how we multiply and create sustainable systems, right? And so we as syndicators know that, exchanges and tax benefits, we can utilize all of that so that $1 creates 20 cents next year, and maybe 20 cents is not life-changing, but what if we do it for 10 years? A little bit of patience is all I'm asking for, right? Is if we could be a little bit patient and be smarter, then the impact could be a lot more lasting, right? I think that you guys kind of understand, like, there's a lot of pitfalls to charity, especially on the accountability side. So we have to get better across the board, at this.
This whole conversation is really, it touches me in a way, because exactly what you just said, right? I'm big on charity and foundations and fundraisers. I'm big into that. But to hear how you've kind of connected the circle between everything that you do, right? It's empowering, and it's just like really a beautiful thing, right? If you teach somebody how to make a dollar, like you said, right? It's so much more impactful, and it's gonna the longevity there. There is longevity there as opposed to just
Yeah. And in the end, I think it gives us a lot more purpose. And you guys know when you're energized, you become more creative as well.
Yeah.
And so I think it's this wonderful loop. And, Dave, you talked about how your network is growing and stuff like that. But the more creative we could be, I think a lot of cool things could happen.
So I don't want to get too lost in the details, but I am curious, like, how did you structure your fund in a way that you can give? Like, what's the structure?
Yeah, so Cora Funds, we partner in as LPs
Okay.
into deals in Kansas City.
Mhm.
Our specialty is 90 to 120 unit value add deals in Kansas City. We have a great team out there. We partner with Oak IQ, which is a group that I've been doing syndications with recently, and they take care of all the operations. We have everything vertically aligned. We have our own construction crew out there so that they know our systems. What Cora does is we come in as LPs and we invest in those deals, and when those deals pay out, it comes into Cora. Now, if you invest in Cora as an investor or an institution, you have a few options. You could take all your profits home, just like in a traditional syndication. You can give away a third, a half, or all of it. And what that where that gift goes is it goes into what's called a donor advised fund, which is just a fund that stays in the charitable loop, and we're able to distribute it to Young Life and to other opportunities to make an impact. Some people have decided to give away all of it, and that's a really great thing. But some people, they still want to see some of those profits, right? For them and their family, they need to take some home, say for the college fund, whatever. Institutions as well, they need to be kind of profit making and sustainable. And so that's kind of how it works. We have a fund that invests into syndications as an LP, and then we have a donor advised fund that all the impact dollars go to.
That's awesome. That's really cool. It's like automatic giving.
Yeah, we call it passive giving or generative giving.
That's
it
pretty cool.
generates.
I like that term,
Yeah.
passive giving.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah.
that's super cool.
So, as a pastor, I think this is something that I've actually experienced on my own because my father is a missionary, right? I was at Thanksgiving dinner with my aunt, and my aunt, her gripe about giving to missionaries is often that that the money might not be used, that the money's actually used to give the missionaries a better life personally than for the actual people who need it. I think she has a very shallow understanding of it because she's never been out in the field and seen it, but I'm sure that she's not the only one seeing that, and there's a lot of Christians and a lot of Korean Christians, especially, that looks at a pastor and says, "Why are you so rich? Like why do you have this much money?"
Yeah.
So how do you deal with those adversities?
Yeah, that's something like internally I struggle with a lot as well. I think it's changing a little bit as the generations go by, but I think it's important that you exemplify generosity, right, to people. And so I just actually gave a sermon yesterday at my church about generosity, and I told them give, and you don't have to give to our church. In fact, there's so many different ways. And so me, by just saying that, I'm exemplifying generosity because I'm not taking from them into our church, but I'm saying go and find these opportunities to go be creative and to generate something out there, right? And so you definitely have to exemplify. Most pastors haven't exemplified it because they haven't had that much, right? But even that, I think the Bible tells us that you give in proportion to what you have, right? And so, Paul, the Apostle Paul, he's writing to the Corinthians, was like the American church, super rich. And he said, you guys think that you guys are generous because you're giving a lot in terms of dollar amount, but the Macedonian church, who's super poor, are giving in greater proportion considering what they have. And that's actually true even now. If you look at generosity studies, the people who have less in terms of dollar amount are more generous in terms of proportion to what they have than those who have more, right? And so I think that maybe pastors in the past should have been generous and should have exemplified generosity, but instead bought jets and stuff like that when they got the money. And that's a problem, right? And that's the whole health and wealth gospel thing that I'm really against, because that's not inspiring at all. That's really selfish. So I think that we need to start to exemplify it. And once we exemplify it, it starts to make more sense.
Awesome. Thank you. Dave, I have a follow-up question on that front. So I feel like I'm a born evangelist. I was just naturally persuading and pushing people to grow, spiritually, mentally, physically, financially. Are you not only coaching spiritually at church, but are you also teaching people how to invest in real estate and what a great vehicle it is to invest in?
Not directly in my church, but definitely through Cora. And Generosity New York is another vehicle that I have for that. I think you got to be careful in the church, and that's another thing. Like, I'm trying to look for other avenues to do this, and it's really hard to find like-minded guys and gals who understand the whole putting together of philanthropy and the multiplication of wealth, because you get misunderstood all the time. Right, when they see you making money, they're like, "Oh, well, he just must be a greedy guy." And then when they see you giving it away, they say, "Oh, well, look, he's being like super Christian-y." But there are very few people who like understand how it all fits together, right? The holistic picture. And when you see a guy like that, like they say, a fisherman can always tell another fisherman from afar. It's kind of like that. You see a guy like that, and you start to connect, and those are the people that you work with. Dude, you're going to be misunderstood all the time. It's just how it goes,
Yeah, that's a really good point.
That's really good. I went to church for the first time in a while this Sunday, actually, and
Amen. By the way,
amen,
Yeah.
Amen to that.
So they were doing the collections, and right before, the woman's like teaching, I guess, new kids how to do the basket, right? And she's like cursing. She's like, no, do it this way, freaking out. And it's just like it made me feel so uncomfortable. I'm like, this feels weird, right? Because she's like, you got to do it this way. I'm like, just let the kids, whatever. And I don't know. I just left feeling like weird about it, because she made like just such a hard push on, like, you got to do it this way, and like, people will give if they want to give, like I don't know. I just left feeling a little weird about it. And I don't know. I'm curious your take. Like obviously you want people to give if they can give, but it's like kind of at their own discretion. I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with this question. It just left a weird taste in my mouth.
I think the key is to teach people that God doesn't need your money, and he never wants to take from you. And it's not about obligation, right? And that's all throughout the New Testament, that obligation kind of cancels out the value of your gift, right? And what like Paul is trying to teach in the New Testament is that we give because it actually is a joy-producing thing in us, right? We give out of our gratitude. Actually, I don't think you have to be a Christian to give out of gratitude. There are plenty of people who do that. But he's saying Christians in particular, like, if you really believe that Jesus died for your sins and he's given you a tremendous eternity with him, like, you should be filled with joy. Like, money should be coming out of your coffers because you're kind of set. Like, he's got you, right? Like, forever. And he's been tremendously generous with you. And for you to reflect that generosity, it should be joyful. And so the spirit of how you do that, the whole giving thing and talking about money and generosity, I think it's got to be a joyful thing. It's got to be definitely humble, and you have to be generous with how you talk to people about it. If it's under compulsion, that's a big issue.
Yeah.
And it turns off a lot of people. I had a pediatric doctor who told me that the church is a racket. And I heard that, and I was like, whoa, a racket. And I was thinking about, like, The Sopranos or something, like a racket, right?
Right.
And she's like, yeah, it's a racket because all they're trying to do is get our money, right? And I thought, wow, that's really sad if that's her church experience. Not her fault, right?
Right.
but like that's what happened to her when she went to church. And I just felt really bad about that because that's not at all how the Bible would tell us to give. It should be out of joy, right?
Wow. I love that, man. Um, being a Christian and knowing Jesus and the things I learned from the Bible and my mentors in the Christian community has made me from a piece of shit, to be honest with you, really, to at least what I consider a decent human being now. I still have a lot of work to do,
All right.
but it holds me down and it makes me a better man. Without God, I wouldn't have nearly close to the amount of financial and business success I've had. And so I really, really encourage everybody, this isn't a evangelist podcast. However,
He's turning it into one though.
Yeah.
it really is the only way to gain true wisdom, right? And so for those that do want to find a community, a family, a brotherhood, a sisterhood in their areas, and they're having a hard time finding that family, what kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, I could point you to some like online resources that I know of that help to point you to pretty good churches. There's one called the Gospel Coalition, and if you go on there and you put in your zip code, and they'll help you kind of find a pretty solid church. But it works if you work it, kind of thing. You have to find a community that you're willing to give into. You got to give it time, and no church is going to be perfect. There are always idiots in church, and there are always crazy people in church. But if you really believe in the grace that God has given to you, then you can make it work, and there's going to be actually a lot of blessing. I kind of, my church is actually pretty wealthy. And I think it's important for us to kind of think about these things deeply. And there's no better place than the church to talk about it. In fact, I was listening to a podcast. I think that, the big guy, Patrick David.
Love him.
He was talking about, like, why is it that 80% of family generational wealth is lost in 3 generations? Like, that's kind of a big issue, right, that we have to talk about. And he's talking about teaching your kids and things like that. But I think that if you don't really understand what wealth is for, and if your kids don't know, the first generation kills themselves to make it, and then the next 3 generations lose it, right? And that first generation guy totally does not expect that that's what's going to happen, right? It's like, if I hit this number and I'm able to give it to them, it's going to set them up, right, for the rest of it. Yeah, you know what I mean? And that's what everybody thinks. And that really doesn't happen for the majority of the time, right? And yet many of us, we're the first generation guy, right? If we don't understand on a deeper level what our wealth is going to do to us and our kids, then we're kind of spinning our wheels, right? Because we're not going to hit that target for our kids and our grandchildren. So I don't know. I just think we just need to think a little bit more deeply about this than we have.
Amazing. Thank you. That's a great answer. Dave, I just want to say, it's amazing what you're doing. It's an inspiration, I think, to every single person here in this room, and hopefully those that are dealing with the same dichotomy of capitalism versus generosity, right? And so I just want to thank you for that, and just say God is proud of you. I'm proud of you, man. It's really awesome work that you're doing. If the people want to find you, reach you, whether to invest or just for advice, what's the best place to get in contact?
Yeah, you could just go to corafunds.com. We haven't gotten our social media really up and going yet, but corafunds.com is probably the best way to find me. But again, there are a lot of ways to make an impact, and it's not just Cora. And there are so many. And my advice is always follow your passions, right? Like, what excites you outside of you, right? And whatever that thing is, I think God has uniquely compositioned you in a way. Like, there are people who care about the arts and music and the Philharmonic. Like, I don't care about those things, but there are people who care about that stuff, and I'm so glad there are people like that, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, core is great, things like that, but what are you passionate about? And go and find what that thing is, and then be generous in that direction. I think people are just going to be so much more happy, right, in that direction. So, yeah, I would really encourage people to take some time and to find out what they're excited about. Be generous in that direction, and I think that a lot more purpose will come their way.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a great having you on the podcast, David. Love
Yeah.
you, brother. God bless you. And that's a wrap.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.